Today, I'd like to talk about two really helpful practices that help us shift out of identification with the small self and into identification with the great self. Right now, we are experiencing things through our senses and our small self, but we can experience a much wider and more blissful experience if we can shift into the great self. So the first practice is concentrating in a point. Why would concentrating in a point help you shift from your small self to the great self? Well, basically, the great self is infinite, absolute, total consciousness. The small self is limited, personal consciousness. And that total consciousness is there all the time, but it is hidden by the limited consciousness of the individual ego or the small self. What concentrating in a point does is it shrinks that ego down to a tiny point and makes it disappear, right? When you are perfectly concentrated in a point, your mind is pulled away from your identity, pulled away from your body, pulled away from your history, and it just goes to a point. And it's like the scenery of the great self is there around us and in front of us all the time. But if I have a bag over my head, I can't see it. Or if I have a screen up in front of me, I can't see it. And basically, concentrating in a point just shrinks that screen that's hiding the totality. It shrinks the individuality. And when it's just a point left, then the totality is clearly visible all around you. So it's a very simple practice, but it just gets your individuality out of the way and opens you up to the totality. And the other way is to remind yourself often that everything is mental, everything is psychic, everything is imagination, everything is divine imagination. So in many different discourses, Sri Sri Anandamurti said that for the human being, there is the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. But for the divine, for Paramapurusha, there is only the psychic and the spiritual. In other words, everything is internal, everything is his own imagination. So when we look at the world in terms of seeing things as physical objects, I'm a separate physical being, you're a separate physical being, and around me are so many separate physical objects. The moment we do that, we lock ourselves into the perspective of the small self, which sees the external world as something material. The moment, however, that we remind ourselves that everything is cosmic imagination, everything is mental, there is nothing material, there is only the psychic, right? And that's what it is from the point of view of your great self, the divine consciousness, right? So you're shifting your viewpoint to the viewpoint of the divine consciousness, for whom everything is mental. So the moment you remind yourself everything is mental, everything is Paramapurusha, our second lesson mantra for those of you who have Ananda Marga meditation, then everything is imagination, and the physical sense of separation that is caused by perceiving the world as material begins to dissolve, and one experiences everything as psychic, and there's no division between you and anything. So it's all your psyche, it's all your imagination, and it's all the divine's imagination, and there's no distinction between the two. So everything is mental. That is the viewpoint of your great self. And by remembering it, you shift into that viewpoint, you shift into that experience. So there we are, two little practices: shrinking the individual self, getting it out of the way, making it disappear so that the totality, shrinking the individuality so the totality is clearly visible. And remembering that everything that you see is psychic, it's mental, which is how your great self sees everything. Those two practices can really help you step out of your individuality and step into your totality. I hope you find that useful. Thank you for watching. Namaskar. Are you sure you